We power more than 2.5 million electric kilometers daily through our network and our batteries, and that has so far led to offset of more than 50,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide.
The UK is committed to helping Indonesia pursue its energy transition ambitions. The flagship initiative for this is the $21 billion Just Energy Transition Partnership. And BII's $15 million investment into the Susi Energy Transition Fund supports the JETP and will help deliver green infrastructure projects across Southeast Asia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Smith, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at British International Investment. I'm absolutely thrilled to be chairing this panel today, Impact on the Planet, Partnerships to Support Climate Innovations. Now, 4 years ago, we launched our climate strategy at BII, and since then, the climate emergency has only intensified. And the people in our regions where we invest are bearing the true brunt of these impacts. There's a clear link between climate change and development, but we can't achieve our mandate without addressing this critical challenge. And we also recognize that we can't do this alone. Building strong partnerships and supporting innovation in our markets is key. And whether it's backing entrepreneurs with tech-led solutions or creating platforms for climate innovation, collaboration is essential. And that's why today we're joined by 3 of our partners who we've worked with over the past year very closely. And they're going to share the challenges that they face on the ground and provide insights into the innovative approaches that they're using to unlock real solutions. Our first speaker is Samir Ibrahim, CEO and co-founder of SunCulture. Now, SunCulture is helping transform agriculture in Africa by providing solar-powered irrigation solutions to smallholder farmers. So this is enhancing food security, but it's also enhancing sustainability. And their innovative approach has empowered countless farmers, transforming lives and communities across the entire continent. We invested in the company last year, and we're helping smallholder farmers with this technology. Next, we have Yida Kamoli, the Managing Director for Africa at New Forests. And Yida brings over 2 decades of experience in sustainable investment, focusing on nature-based solutions and sustainable forestry. New Forest strategy in Africa aims to deliver impactful investments while promoting conservation and community development. We've partnered with New Forest and Africa Forestry Impact Platform, or AFIB, and we'll go on to discuss this in much more detail in this session. And finally, we have Quintin Vaquette, a founding partner at Wavemaker Impact. This is a pioneering climate tech venture builder based in Southeast Asia. Quintin and his team are dedicated to creating scalable solutions that are addressing environmental challenges. His work at Wavemaker Impact focuses on leveraging technology and innovation to drive sustainable development and positive change. We also invested in Wavemaker's fund last year to help invest in these early stage climate solutions in the region, which is relatively new for BII. So I'm going to go on to ask questions to the panel. Samir, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. SunCulture is working with smallholder farmers in East Africa. Can you just tell us more about the business? What's the need that the business is trying to address? And how are you going about addressing that?
Thanks, Maria, for having me and for all the support. So the problems we're solving are monumental, and there's a few problems. First is we all know that climate change is making it harder to grow food. Yet at the same time, we need to grow more food to feed a growing population. We've all seen the population charts, and we know where it's going in the next few decades. But if we continue to do so in the same way, we're going to run into problems because agriculture contributes to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to figure out how to solve all three of these problems, because if we don't, we're going to run into more food challenges, we're going to run into more political instability, and we're unfortunately going to have to support many more people who are forced to migrate due to climate change. The easy solution would have been to deploy a bunch of irrigation across a bunch of markets. It's an old technology, quite unsexy. It can increase yields by up to 5 times. It's worked before. But remember, the third problem is that agriculture contributes to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and a big majority of that comes from water pumps for farming. So what we do is we figure out how to decarbonize irrigation with solar. The challenge with that, again, is that most smallholder farmers can't afford the upfront cost of solar irrigation, let alone regular irrigation. That's why of the 700 million people living in smallholder farmers in Africa, only 4% irrigate. So what we do is we use financial services and carbon revenues to make the cost of solar irrigation 50% cheaper than diesel and petrol pumps. We sell, we install, and we service these systems with our in-house sales agents and engineers. And then we allow farmers to buy other products and services that help them become more resilient to climate change through a marketplace. We've become the largest smallholder solar irrigation company across Africa. We work both in East and West Africa, and the impact is incredible. We have nearly 100% of our customers reporting improving their quality of life. The women of the household are saving 17 hours a week that they previously spent physically moving water. And this is physically moving 20-liter cans of water, which weighs 20 kg. So it's like the big weight plates in the gym. The woman of the household will wake up every morning spending 2 or 3 hours physically moving water, first to meet her domestic needs and then meet her agriculture needs. We're seeing that 95% of our customers are accessing a solar water pump for the first time. We're seeing that almost half of our customers are getting access to credit for the first time from us. We're not even a bank. So we're seeing impacts across financing, across access to irrigation and solar services, across food impacts, across time savings, and it's a remarkable thing for us to see.
It really is. So when you're trying to measure the impact that you're having, are you looking across all of these? You're looking at the livelihoods, you're looking at the financial inclusion, and you're looking at the sustainability aspect of it?
Yeah, you have to. I think, impact is complex and it's nuanced. And I think you have to think about what are the second and third layer of impacts. Other than, for us, it's increased income, increased food. But then there's all these other layers when it comes to health and education that we need to pay attention to because they are really important.
Right. Quinton, can I come on to you now? You're a founding partner at Wavemaker, the pioneering climate tech venture builder in Southeast Asia. Can you start with what the company is setting out to achieve and then link to which are the first investments that you've made to try to realize that?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I guess the problem we're trying to tackle is that climate change is still very much considered as an engineering problem, whereas actually a large and significant chunk of it is a human problem. It's a behavioral problem. And so we found that half of emissions can be globally avoided or reduced using tech that exists. And like Samir is explaining, this is tech that exists, that is great, that works. But it requires business model innovation in order to be adopted by the users and the customers that could use it. And so as we kind of discovered that we call it the easy to abate emissions, which are still hard, but for which there's tech. And so it means that what we're essentially doing is we're building ventures that go after these business model innovation opportunities, that go after solving some of these problems where tech is not the challenge, but the challenge is increasing adoption. And so what's interesting is as we sort of started playing out that model, what we realized is that the biggest company that we think can be building climate and that is reasonable to operate within a certain segment, a certain geography, is 100 megatons, 100 million tons of CO2 reduction, CO2 or methane and so on. And so what we kind of came up with is that we can build what we call 100 by 100 companies, which are companies that have the potential to generate more than $100 million in high margin revenue, be a unicorn, and at the same time have the potential to abate 100 MT. And so if you kind of apply the same principles that you would apply in VC in unit economics, market size, and so on, both on the carbon and on the dollar side, then suddenly you get an interesting way of thinking about impact as well as dollars, and as a result, scalable companies. So I mean, we're new. We've been around for just a couple of years. BII backed us on our first fund. And what we hope to do really is over the next 1 and 2 decades, build a portfolio of company that could abate 10% of global emissions using this model. And so we'll see whether we get there, of course. But
Well,
so
we certainly like that ambition.
yeah, lots of reasons and lots of problems along the way, but we'll try at least. And so I guess hence the question of partnership, right? Because this is something for which you need a lot of people. So the interesting question is that we saw the reason why we are venture builder rather than an investment fund is that we saw a lot of great entrepreneurs building commercial companies in e-commerce and marketplaces and all these places where you can make lots of money. But we didn't see enough of these great entrepreneurs tackling some of these other issues where we also see that you can make a lot of money, but you also solve climate problems. And that's why essentially what we do is we go after these entrepreneurs who've got 1 or 2 or 3 exits behind them. Typically, they've got children now, and they say, "I want my next company needs to be something that means something." And but they're like, "I'm not a climate scientist. I don't know how to think about climate." And so that's why essentially we then give these entrepreneurs a team of 3 people for 6 months, and with a process we then get to a business that we can start. So one of the examples that I think is really cool is a company called Rise, which is a company that we launched about a year and a half ago. And so the company is going after the emissions of rice cultivation. So interestingly, rice, the rice that we eat, right, emits about 1 gigaton worth of emissions globally in the form of methane. And so if you put that in perspective, that's about the size of aviation globally. And so there's so much money going into aviation, so many entrepreneurs going into aviation, but nobody's looking at this rice problem. So what's even more interesting is that the technology to reduce the emissions in rice is about 100-year-old, and it's effectively just draining the paddy, the paddy that's flooded in which the rice grows, just drain it twice in the season, roughly. And what happens is that the sun exposes the bacteria die, and as a result, they don't produce methane anymore. So the solution is so simple, but the behavior change is hard, because suddenly you need to get 300 million rice farmers, who are some of the poorest in the world, to do something that they've been doing for generations differently. And so I think quite similar actually to what Samir was sharing, is that Rise is essentially a fintech that found what the biggest problem is for rice farmers, which is input financing. Typical rice farmer will pay about 20 to 30% on their inputs that they borrow from the local input shop, which is fertilizer and seeds and so on. And then hopefully they get a right season, and then hopefully they can pay back. If not, they're in debt for the next 5 years. And so essentially we created a company that goes after improving the efficiency of those farmers, financing their inputs, and is effectively able to increase their economic situation by 20 to 30%, which is a mix of yield, lower financing costs, and better inputs. And so I think what's been really cool is that this company, which is business model innovation and so on, we've been able, again, in the context of partnerships, to build this together with some really big partners like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' fund, and Temasek and Gen Zero here in the region, and that has really given the company the ability to grow really fast, start in 2 countries at the same time, and hopefully have a lot of impact in the coming years.
No, thank you. That's a really good, tangible example to bring the opportunity to life. So the opportunity is clear. Can we maybe just spend a moment talking about the challenges that are, I think, especially unique to the region that you operate in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so Southeast Asia is, I think what's interesting is that it's a place where I guess a couple of things. So one, there's a huge gap between where climate VC capital has gone and where the emissions are. To give you an idea, there are over 300 electric vehicle companies of any shape or form: 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers, 6-wheelers, 5-wheelers. So about 60% of all VC money goes into mobility, whereas it's only 12% of the problem. So who's looking after the ag problems, the land use problems, the industry problems, and so on? So that's the first gap. The second interesting question is that about 50% of all emissions in the region, 50% are either agriculture and food or deforestation. And so which kind of usually links to agriculture and food. And so it means that different from some other regions, this is essentially a ag heavy and land use heavy region. So the businesses you want to build to do something about these emissions are in this space. So that's why a lot of our portfolio also focuses there. And then I think that the last thing that I found really interesting is that I often hear like, oh, but these regions don't have the Southeast Asia doesn't have the right regulations in play to help the incentives and support and so on. And that's true, but actually Southeast Asia has a lot of inefficiencies. And so when you operate in a large segment with hundreds of millions of people who operate in a very decentralized fashion, there are lots of inefficiencies in that. And what's interesting about inefficiencies is that you can solve them. And when you solve them, you essentially create value. As a result, you can create a driver. So what I was explaining about rice is that the fact that rice farmers have to pay 30% for 3 months of financing doesn't make sense. So if you can solve that in a different way, then you can create value for them, and as a result, create an incentive to change behavior in an economic way, right? Not in a sort of philanthropic or what I often hear like educational way. You consider them as customers and you create value for them, and then and that's how you can change behavior.
Oh, thank you. That's really valuable insight. Ida, let's talk about African Forestry Impact Platform. This is which New Forest set up with BII and some other DFIs. Can you just again tell us a little bit about the need for AFIP and why the company was set up?
Yeah, cool. So I hope you can hear me clearly. So firstly, we're very simply a plantation forestry investor. Yeah. And as a point of uniqueness, we are an evergreen fund. And this is something that's been debated in Africa for many years in the whole private equity sector. And I think we're one of the pioneers in this. Now, why was this necessary? At the end of the day, forestry is a long-term asset class. The average tree will grow from between 7 to 25 years in maturity. So therefore, you definitely need a group of investors who can hold this asset class for a significant period of time. Now, what had been happening across Africa and virtually every African country that has had plantation assets being planted with a mixture of private sector and public sector funding. And if you look very carefully, there's always been somewhat of a dearth of enough funding to plant these forests. But more importantly, in some cases, you could see there was a risk of them becoming stranded assets. And I've also mentioned this very long holding period. So you've got to find the right investors who can commit for that time. So one of the most important roles I think that we will play is really safeguarding these assets, because more than any other type of asset, if you've got a 10,000, 20,000 hectare forest and you don't look after it, you actually could have a potential disaster here. And that's really what we need to think about. And there are all the risks going on. One of the biggest risks we're worried about now is fire protection. And we all watch all the things that are happening around the world. That's also happening in our region in Africa. So we have to have very active fire protection mechanisms. Across Africa, there's always a risk of encroachment. That's farmers coming into the forest to use the land for farming. And of course, you then lose the trees. But also, charcoal and firewood is one of the primary sources of energy. And there's various statistics where people talk about 50, 60, 70, 80%, largely for cooking. So if you live in Africa, you will definitely have seen very many and very sad examples of deforestation taking place. So acquiring these assets and looking after them and safeguarding is, for us, one of our primary ways in which we look at this. But then over and above that, you then look at sustainability. And one of the important ways of ensuring they're not being encroached on is how do you create a good commercial story around this? And so we look at our investments across the value chain. Again, one of the most interesting statistics is Africa exports, or rather, Africa imports as finished wood products. So that's furniture, fittings for houses, twice the value of its exports of logs. So there's that huge value addition that can actually attract revenue back into country. But much more importantly, if you sit with a carpenter in quite a few countries, they're struggling to get access to good quality wood. So therefore, you've lost the opportunity for even the artisanal sector to grow and develop in its own right. Now, the fun bit is, and maybe it seems like a small thing, but actually part of being an active investor, part of being an interested investor, we've also seen a lot of brain drain in terms of people leaving, particularly the whole primary ag sector in general, and forestry also, is facing that. So it's a good signaling effect to the people who are building their careers today that there is an opportunity in forestry. Of course, we need it, and of course, there's opportunities to grow. And this cannot be underestimated. If you look across most of agriculture in Africa, if I broaden it beyond forestry, you will see this very worrying brain drain, which brings itself out in a lot of projects being very challenged when you try and manage them out. And then finally, we'll see how things develop in the coming years. But I mentioned this public sector and private sector assets. On the private sector side, of course, easier to transact. But what we expect to see is that a lot of these assets, which the governments across Africa borrowed to invest in from the likes of the World Bank, this is probably an opportunity and a moment for them to relieve their balance sheets and commercialize these assets. And we're hoping to see that happen, as well as also the opportunity to even improve the quality of the management of those assets. So that's really roughly the opportunity that we're driving today.
And what would you say is unique about New Forest's approach to this? And how are you looking at this differentiated?
Severalfold. Well, one, I mentioned we're an evergreen fund, which means we've got a long-term view. And long-term here means, as I said, a tree is anywhere from 7 to 25 or 27 years. Now, it's a very unique investor who can take a view like that. And much more importantly, particularly when you're planting new forests, you're cash flow negative for the better part of 7 to 10 years. So that is a point of uniqueness we have. Now, how are we able to look at that? For, as you mentioned, we have BII as an investor who is able to take a long-term view together with other DFIs. That's the useful part of our story. We are part of New Forests, and New Forest is the second biggest timberland manager around the world. That's extremely important because it does mean that if you're asking people to take that kind of a view, you better have experts to be able to sell, to produce a convincing story, and most importantly, to execute on that. So that, I think those two parts are quite critical. And then thirdly, there is the impact for us in sustainability is important also because when you're managing assets like land, which are emotive, you really do have to have a commitment to how you work with communities. For us, and I'll give an example, fire protection for us is the communities get involved, and they're the ones who, alarm and say, we can see a fire being set. They also will change behaviors in terms of how they manage their own farms to avoid fire risk engulfing the whole area. So sustainability really does become a very, it's a core business need as much as it is the right thing to do as a business.
Great, thank you. And I just want to focus on this theme of partnership, because everybody has mentioned, including me in the intro, the importance of partnerships in achieving these critical objectives. Maybe just to get a little bit more specific, Samir, can I ask you, how have you seen partnerships useful in addressing these climate challenges in your space?
Everything is about partnerships. I'll give you sort of a live example. So we're working on a way to deploy enough solar irrigation across Kenya to get the country to become on a pathway to being 100% food secure from a production standpoint. So huge, never happened before, first of its kind. It'll cost $244 million to do that. So relatively little bit amount of money to solve the problem. And it's a mixture of equity, debt, carbon financing, and results-based financing, or subsidy, but rebranded as RBF. And I'll talk about rebranding in a second. We need innovative financing mechanisms to figure out how to finance this. So for example, we have this really cool partnership with BII, or we have a carbon facility that is structured in a way that no carbon facility has ever been structured in the world. And like Yida said, you need investors who can think innovatively and take early stage financing risks on new products to be able to move a sector forward. So if you look at how film financing was transformed with CAA a few decades ago, if you look for the debt for nature swaps that have been happening around the world, you need folks who are taking financial products and moving them and changing them based off of the need. But I think the most interesting thing is we need partnerships to help spread the message that while there is a requirement for innovative financing, from a first principles perspective, we just need to do the same thing we've done in other sectors. So what I find really funny is if you look at any commercial construction project in the world, you have an equity slice, you have a debt slice, and you have a subsidy slice. That's all used for feasibility. When you look at every grid in the world, it's between 75 and 100% subsidized. If you look at agriculture and energy in the developed world, all subsidized. In the UK, you get your bicycle subsidized from a cycle to work scheme. Yet in the markets that we work in, because governments don't have access to capital, and I was on the board of the Kenya Revenue Authority previously for a year, so I've seen what happens in the inside. Because there's no capital, we have to go out and raise philanthropic capital to replace government subsidies in other parts of the world. But when we talk about philanthropy, everyone says, oh, no, this isn't commercial. We don't want to ruin the market. We don't want to change market dynamics with subsidies, when it's actually the same exact thing that's been used to make this iPhone, to make the computer that I'm on. BYD has been subsidized by the Chinese government by $29 billion. So I think what becomes interesting from a partnership perspective is we lean on our partners to give credibility to, hey, when we talk about blended capital, it's like an old existing thing that every developed market has been founded on. We're just using different language because that's the language of the money that we're receiving. But when we think about blended capital, it's really not a new thing. So we lean on our partners to go out and say, look, this is really a normal thing. We've done this for this construction project and this housing project. We're just doing it for distributed infrastructure right now. It's just a normal infrastructure project that has taken a bit of time to figure out because no one's done it before, but now we can come in with really traditional capital. But I find the semantics of it and the requirement to use a specific amount of semantics to be quite interesting and quite funny at times, but our partners do a really good job of helping us create these financial products that fit within the categories that are almost acceptable from a commercial standpoint. So, when we're talking about a large carbon facility, we've had an amazing experience with the folks at BII helping us figure out how do we structure this so it becomes palatable for more commercial capital to come in. So how do we make everyone realize this is the same type of product they're used to funding, just using the language that works in the way that we do. And I find this very nuanced way of approaching partnership to be actually one of the most value add that we've seen.
And Quinton, I want to give you a chance. Do you have any comments on, I think, specifically the role that DFIs, play in Southeast Asia and in climate tech?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So, it's I fully ascribe to the idea of partnerships and the importance, right? Like, there is no way we can do anything in the objectives that I mentioned earlier without partnerships with founders, with co-investors, and with LPs. When we went to market with our first fund, it was a bit weird, right? We went to market with a strange strategy of venture building in a strange region, Southeast Asia, going after climate, very focused with first-time GPs. And so, this is not an easy sell, right? So the it wasn't necessarily easy to get people with us, and I think we've had overwhelming support from BII and some of the other DFIs, and that has really made a difference. So this has now given us a shot at kind of trying to do what we think we can do, and then hopefully within the next 1 and 2 years we can put some of that to fruition, and then as a result move to a second fund and so on. So I think the role here was very, very clear, and we're super grateful for the support.
Good. That is certainly what we're trying to do, is help de-risk and catalyze markets for future investors. Okay, we have 3 minutes left, and so I'm going to do a rapid fire last question. If everyone can keep it to around a minute, but I think it'll be an interesting question for the audience, which is, looking forward, what other innovations do you think will help shape future investments in the emerging markets? Yida, I'm going to come to you just because you were the last to speak, if that's okay.
Yeah, look, I think for me, the key focus, what we're seeing in Africa, outside of South Africa, is the insurance and pension companies are starting to realize they need to manage their investments a lot more actively and look for more alpha. So I think where I would be focusing now is keeping an eye on that and saying, I'm building a business for these domestic insurance companies and pension funds to invest in. So what does that business need to look like to be investable? What do the capital structures need to look like? And then how do I use DFI money where I can as the venture capital bridge into that space?
Quentin, you're next in my line of view.
Yeah, so look, I think what we will see is many more business models in the climate space. I think so far we've always taken climate as an engineering problem and more technology, hard to abate sectors and so on. It's very needed, but I think there's a coming to realizing that actually a lot of the tech is already there. We need more adoption, more distribution, more business models that make this possible, and so I think we'll see a lot of really exciting companies popping up like this.
Good. Hope so. It's Samir. Yes.
I actually have a view that I fully believe in innovation, and I fully believe we need innovation to move us forward as humanity. I also think that we can solve most of our problems with existing innovation right now. Just we need to repurpose them from one area to the other. I've seen a lot of success in various markets and in various sectors figuring out how to use the combination of carbon financing and results-based financing to make climate tech affordable to the masses. And I think that if we can get people to cut bigger checks and take bigger bets in single sectors and in single problems, we can start moving the needle. So I see the combination of those and the sort of moving from a spray and pray approach to a more focused approach of funding. I think those two combinations could really move us forward.
Okay, well, we'll be watching this space. Thank you for your time today, and more importantly, thank you for your very hard work trying to address these critical development needs. We're certainly grateful for each of your partnerships.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.